Hello buddy, it's Wyvern here, back with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on Bleak Coast Isle, playing as the Forces of the Empire against the Forces of the Vampire Counts. And for this build I wanted to shake something up a little bit because, I've been playing a fairly standardized build at this point against Vampire Counts for a while, mostly focusing of course on cav play, sort of a demi-blob. But lately I've been experimenting in multiple matchups with either straight Empire Infantry or mostly Empire Infantry builds, trying to make the most of those state troops and seeing what you can squeeze out of them, because I know a lot of people simply ditch the normal skirmishers and anything that's more expensive than a spearman in favor of maxing out your cavalry and your mobile skirmish contingents and maybe some artillery thrown in the mix as well. But I've been trying to squeeze out a little bit out of those state troops. Of course, they're not the most impressive when it comes to stats, but you can bring a lot of them. They are fairly cheap and they are fairly efficient. Decent leadership, decent combat stats across the board. Nothing spectacular, but not terrible either. And of course, you can bring a lot of missile play to bear. So going over the build here, I did decide to go with Marcus Wolfheart. Obviously, against Vampire Counts, you often don't want to bring too much missiles because they've got a lot of backline shutdown. They've got summons, they've got various monsters, they've got bats, dogs, knights, all that sort of stuff. So coming in with Marcus Wolfheart, he gives me a little bit of ranged poke, but he also does give me a charge of net with Hunter Snare, which is nice. If my opponent brings multiple backline harass units, I can potentially shut down several. We also do have the Amber Bow in there to do a little bit of ranged poke damage, especially focus out lords or heroes that might be a nuisance. Beside him, we do have a Light Wizard. Now, this bad boy is coming in with his passive, so we will be getting that leadership buff and immunity psychology every time we cast a spell. False protection just for that slight tweak to our stats and keeping our troops in the fray, whether that's our missile units or our infantry units, it doesn't really matter. You just want to keep them in the fight. Shem's Burning Gaze once again to whittle down key enemy targets, and then Net of Mintok because, well, this is kind of an old school Empire build. We're going for that net spam, and what better way to do that than a Light Wizard with Net of Mintok. Now, besides that, front line, actually fairly elite. We've got 3 units of Greatswords in here. These guys are quite decent when it comes to fighting Vampire Counts. They might not be the best in matchups like, for example, High Elves or Chaos or against factions like that without really hefty support. But against a faction like Vampire Counts who cap out at fairly low tier units, Greatswords can definitely put in the work. And with their solid combat stats, AP and bonus for infantry, they should hold out rather well against anything that my opponent can throw at them. Beside that, we do have some Spearmen with shields for that extra melee defense covering the flanks, and then a whole plethora of spears, 5 units of them in total, covering all other angles, which gives us a very solid Taoist style box here. 4 units of handguns are covering the interior here. You can see they're pretty blobbed up, and that's because we don't really need to worry about artillery, or usually you don't have to worry too much about spells either. If I see a Wind of Death, I gotta dodge it. Doesn't really matter if it's a line or a box. Just gotta get out of the way. We also do have the Silver Bullets to get some magic damage against ethereals, as well as that stock and potential to jump an opponent who's not expecting it. Finally, 2 Empire Knights are providing us with a bit of staying power and mass. Obviously, they're not going to win against most Vampire Counts cavalry or even some of their better infantry and of course the monsters, but they can bog them down. That's what really matters. Now for my opponent here, he did go with a fairly slow and sort of swarmy build. This is a pretty common thing you'll see. Most Empire Count players will either max out on the cavalry and kind of go for a cavalry swarm, or they'll go with a more plodding advance and just look to swarm you with lots of trash. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. 2 Necromancers actually back up this infantry box, both of them on Corpse Quest with Unholy Lodestones. They're actually a pretty significant upgrade over base Corpse Guard, just because you get that additional healing aura with Master of the Dead, so you get that plus Unholy Lodestone, which combines your +6 health per second, pretty decent. Plus you get Vigor Mortis, and then of course both do have the Raised Dead, as well as surprisingly Van Hell's Dance Macabre on them. So looking to get a lot of sort of spell spam there. We've also got Forbidden Rod to get lots of Winds of Magic, especially stacked on Manfred over here, who's got more summons, Van Hell's, Invocation, and Spirit Leech, and of course the Sword of Unholy Power and Master of the Dark Arts. Front line is a mix of skeletons and zombies. Behind that, we've got a bunch of Graveguard, usually adequate to steamroller state troops, but against Greatswords, they should have a pretty bad time of it. Some spears in the back, as well as a combination of Hex Wraiths, the Chillgeist, and the Dire Pack here. And those guys are pretty nasty. They can do a lot of damage. If they get into the back line, they could certainly rout my units very quickly. A little bit of greed here for my opponent, trying to get some cheeky harass here with Manfred, and takes a volley from the guns, losing several hundred HP very, very quickly. Forced to back the hell away. Mats, in the meantime, are looking for an opening into the box, but this is where things get tough. Those Knights, while not very good against most true units that the Vampire Counts can throw at you, are actually pretty good against bats. If they get their charge off, bats will go down very quickly with their non-existent armor. So that's something you got to be wary of. And these knights are both waiting there. We've got spears as backup. Now, spears are very bad against bats because they tend to miss due to the high melee defense. But knights sitting just a little bit clear of the guns means that if the bats dive in, they are going to get charged down very fast. And you can see here, they're taking gunnery fire. Bit of a misplay here on my opponent's part. Normally what you want to do, in my opinion, when you're in this sort of situation, you want to wait. You want to wait for this front line to actually close the gap. Keep all your fast troops out on the sides, far out of range. So Manfred could be out here. The bats could be all the way back here. Just sit tight, out of gunnery range. But as you can see here, yeah, it's not the best use of ammo, but if we can whittle down these bats, remove them from play, then we're going to be in a much stronger position when this main army hits. So that's a big misplay for my opponent, and something we're able to exploit right now to get ourselves a bit of an early lead. Obviously, each bat isn't worth very much, but it can potentially mean these guns will get a little bit of extra fire once the lines actually meet. Now, over here, the greatswords are being pushed forward. You can see I'm actually pulling spears forward because I know I actually did a full count of my opponent's army. The engagement time here was fairly long, so I knew that my opponent actually had all of his troops within sight. I knew where all of them were, so I knew I didn't have to worry about any sneaky shenanigans, any invisible ghouls or something. Marcus Wolfart is going to start teeing off on the Necromancer there, and in the meantime, lines are starting to clash. Skeleton spears or skeleton warriors diving in against the greatswords. Unfortunately, I don't really get my counter charges, so definitely a bit of misplay there, but we are able to sort of block off all these advancing troops, the Graveguard and the zombies, with spearmen. Over here, these spears actually are going to intercept the Sternsmen, and as the bats dive down, they are immediately going to get countered. Now, you can see Manfred there charges in pretty boldly. I wasn't paying attention. My gun's focused on Necromancer there, but the Knights do get in here. They're going to crush the Fellbats pretty quick, while the Necromancer gets turned into mush by crossfire of guns, and this lodestone can't get close. He needs to get super close to get his zombie summon off, but he's not really able to do so on a slow mount like this. One of the reasons you don't really want to bring slow mounts like this against Empire in general, but especially when faced with a mob like this, and the Necromancer goes down very quickly, which means these skeletons are going to lose all of that support that my opponent was hoping to give them, all those heals and those summons. Invocation Knight going down on Manfred instead of more valuable units means that I'm able to really clean up these summons. The Skeleton Warrior summon and all the bats are gone. And although the Necromancer here is trying to force his way through, we are able to net him down, net him as well as these Hex Wraiths, the Chillgeists, as well as the Dire Pack. Now, great Van Hels's Dance Macabre here is going to make these greatswords on a timer. But keep in mind, because all these troops are clumped, and that's a big misplay on my opponent's part, there's only a handful of actually dangerous units attacking the greatswords. They're only up to 107 kills. That's because a lot of these souped up units are zombies and skeletons who can't hurt greatswords even if they hit. So the Chillgeists who really need to be getting that damage in are getting blocked by their own allies. So that really sucks. Now, my opponent is able to breach the line here, but we do still have reserves. Spears are collapsing over here. Spears over there pulling this way. These Empire Knights fighting their way clear. And as my opponent does try to get those zombie summons off on my backline, he is definitely on a timer. He's losing those key units. Those Necromancers are going down, getting shot to crap. The zombie summon here isn't really going to do much. It might be able to rout these spearmen off, but not before this Necromancer gets torn to shreds. And now the Hex Wraiths and Dire Pack, although they do pull through, are struggling to put a dent in these guns. And you can see we're actually trying to drop a Frost Protection on them, keeping them in the fray. Silver Bullets unloading on the Hex Wraiths. The Chillgeists, of course, incredibly vulnerable to that magic damage. And a bit of a misplay here on my part, not pulling the Knights in fast enough. The Knights could have really been engaging on these Chillgeists much sooner, blocking them off, preventing them from getting to my guns. But as it turns out, the guns here are going to get terror routed, which is less than ideal. That said, the rest of the gun line in pretty good shape. These guys getting focused by Manfred while I focus over here. But Manfred's not able to shut all of them down. He does overcast a spell there. I'm not entirely sure what it was. I do believe it was another summon. I believe some more Skeleton Warriors being summoned on these guns, trying to shut them down, but the spears are sort of pincering them and denying them good damage. Greatswords now, having cleaned up these skeletons, are falling back. Still a 90 model, so they did quite a good job there. Manfred here being a bit of an issue, but we're going to pull our spears into him, as well as the Empire Knights. Use that high mass to shut him down. And my opponent is definitely running out of options. Handgunners rallying out here in the distance. Chillgeists almost wiped out. And at this point, it's really just a handful of infantry units holding on, but they're not really too much of an issue. Once all the fast support is gone, we can just flank and shoot these Sternsmen and the Graveguard to death. So they're not really a problem. These two elites hanging out there, actually 3 elites, aren't really an issue. Even if we had to shoot through their silver shields, it would be manageable at this point. Manfred does try to fight his way clear here, doing his very best. Popping the Van Hels's Dance Macabre, just trying to get every last ounce of speed, but it is not enough. He just gets torn to shreds, and the Master of Dragunov does topple to the ground there. And that's going to be it for the Vampire Counts. The Balance of Power swing pretty heavily out of their favor. Keep in mind, most of this trash doesn't have much weight on the Balance of Power. It's only really the Graveguard left, and we're actually in rather good shape. Able to run them off the field now. as a full army loss kicks in, and those Sternsmen, who are actually giving quite the fight to these greatswords, do crumble. That's going to be it for the vampires. So going over the build here, it's nothing too fancy, but I thought it was fun to see just how well Empire State troops can, in fact, hold out. We had some chevrons on these spearmen ahead of time. Some were gained throughout the course of the battle. The greatswords, you can see, gaining chevrons in there. The guns gaining chevrons. Now, granted, my opponent had some slip-ups. Certainly, he got a little overzealous with the Fellbats and Manfred. They probably should have stayed further back. But ultimately, when push came to shove, this build just held. It's very difficult. Those bats even crumbled within seconds, because between the knights and the pinstring spears, we were able to shut them down very, very quickly. The Dire Pack and Hextrates weren't able to push in, and whenever Manfred or any of the heroes tried to push in to get summons off, they got shot to crap by the guns, and that's really kind of a problem for this sort of build. Now, this is why a lot of people do go with a heavier cavalry presence. You could cut some of these Necromancers, cut some of this chaff, and get a few more Blood Knights or units like that on the field, or maybe even Black Knights. But ultimately, it just wasn't quite enough to bust the Empire box. And I was actually impressed with how well the Empire box held, despite the fact that potentially there were 3 summons going down. We had a lot of backline harass. We were able to shut it all down. Wolfheart doing a good job just focusing out the key targets. Same with the Light Wizard helping with that. And really shutting down this Empire count push. And I think that even if you were dealing with a more hefty cavalry presence, you could counter that, because in turn, more cavalry means, well, there's not much pressure on your front line. You can just bog your opponent down with trash spears, and then you've got a lot of leftover troops to cover the back line and clog them up, and cavalry isn't the best at getting into a back line that easily. So I was pretty pleased, and I think it's a decent build. Probably not my go-to, not the biggest on static infantry play, but I think it's a decent one. It was definitely fun to try something a little different for Empire. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. As usual, leave your thoughts, opinions, comments, and critiques down below. I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.